Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Yes. Good morning, Ayo, and good morning, Rufai.
Good morning, Femi.
How's everybody doing?
We are doing all right.
Wonderful.
We can't wait.
Exactly. Very, very good. Good morning to viewers. Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Now, let's start with the continent of Africa. There's been a major shift in Africa's financing landscape, where African nations are now paying more to China in debt repayments than they receive in fresh loans. Let's take a look at this chart. As we can see, is this our first chart? Okay, wonderful. So as we can see, China, which is the world's biggest manufacturing nation, swung from providing some $30.4 billion in net funding to Africa in the 5 years through 2014, went on to start receiving some $22.1 billion in net repayments over the past 5 years. Now that in and of itself is a reversal of $52 billion over the past decade. Now this is according to analysts and analysis by One Data for the Development Finance Observatory. Now if we move on, another institute, this time a separate report by Boston University's Global Development Policy Center, they showed that China's lending to Africa has plunged over time. So you can see that downwards decline to about $2 billion in 2024. And that was from $28.8 billion in 2016. So quite a significant shift. So the question is why? Why is this shift happening? Well, there have been defaults by certain countries. The likes of Zambia, Ghana, Ethiopia have been defaulting on their loans to China, and this may have contributed to the drop in China's official lending to the African continent over the past decade. In addition to that, we do know, or rather not so much in addition to that, despite that fact, when we're still looking at China-Africa engagements, there's still quite a deep relationship there, and they have strengthened. So you have deals linked to President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative, which reached record global activity last year, and that was with a number of $128.4 billion, and that was mostly in construction contracts, and about $85.2 billion of that were in investments. Now looking at that, Africa had the lion's share of that investment, $61.2 billion it was worth, most of that driven by the private sector and the companies therein. And then when we're looking at trade deals between China and Africa, they did also reach a record level of about $348 billion last year, while governments are increasingly turning to the yuan for cheaper financing. Zambia, who we just mentioned had previously defaulted on its loans, they've actually started accepting mining royalties and tax payments in the Chinese currency, something that you can imagine would unsettle the likes of Donald Trump. So there are very much interesting times ahead when we're looking at financing and the African continent. And as ever, let's move over to Spain. Now, Spain is taking a bold step on immigration. It's moving to regularize hundreds of thousands of migrants living in the country without legal status. So in a surprise decree approved by the government, undocumented immigrants who arrived before the end of 2025 and have lived in Spain for at least 5 months and have a clean criminal record will be granted temporary legal residency and the right to work. Now, the measure could affect around 500,000 people, making it easier to integrate into Spanish society and its economy. And it also bypasses a stalled parliamentary bill which had been enacted through executive decree. Now, supporters of this say it boosts human rights and fills vital labor gaps in Spain. However, critics do argue that it may encourage irregular migration. Now, under Spain's existing nationality laws, long-term residents may eventually qualify for citizenship after years of legal residence. So again, very interesting to see how this country is dealing with its migrants crisis. And staying with immigration, there's been a surprising new development at the Winter Olympics. Now, US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, their agents are now set to play a security support role at the 2026 Winter Games in Milan and Cortina over in Italy. They say they're going to be assisting with vetting and risk mitigation for US delegations alongside diplomats and Italian authorities. However, as you can imagine, the announcement has sparked controversy in Italy, where critics, including Milan's mayor, have loudly objected to ICE's presence, citing concerns about the agency's reputation and recent contentious actions over in the United States. Now, ICE officials say that the unit will not conduct any immigration enforcement activity on Italian soil and will operate under Italian command as part of broader Olympic security preparations. I wonder what that's going to look like. Well, we'll get into that discussion a little later. Let's take a look at our newspaper headlines. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And This Day does lead with the fact that Turkey is targeting a $5 billion trade volume with Nigeria. You see our picture headline of both presidents, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Both countries have agreed to establish a joint economy and trade committee, and that's in order to boost Turkish investments. You do have the Turkish president pledging support for Nigeria's fight against terrorism, as Nigeria and Turkey signed 9 bilateral agreements covering defense, education, media, diplomacy, and social development. So, a good visit, many would say. Moving on to the Punch this morning, we've got issues with the electric grid. So we are seeing reports that Nigeria's power grid collapsed again, marking the 3rd incident in less than a month, with discos blaming low electricity generation for the disruptions, while generation fell sharply to as low as 39 megawatts during the incident. And staying on this same theme, we've got the New Telegraph this morning. And the New Telegraph does also lead with the fact that Nigeria's national grid collapsed for the 2nd time in 4 days, prompting the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry to declare the situation an economic emergency and called for an independent forensic audit. While the Nigerian independent systems, we're still on the New Telegraph. Thank you so much. Let's go back. Wonderful. And so the Nigerian systems operator, NISO, said that the grid had since been fully restored and power supply has been returned to normal. So we'll see what happens there. Now we can have the Daily Independent. Thank you. So the Daily Independent this morning reports that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has proposed increasing the number of court appeal justices from 70 to 110 in order to address case backlogs and improve justice delivery. Moving on to the Daily Sun. The Daily Sun reports that the Abuja Division of the Federal High Court struck out Nnamdi Kanu's ex parte motion seeking transfer from the Sokoto Correctional Facility after his lawyer withdrew, citing irreconcilable differences and a lack of proper service. Now, the Daily Trust does report that the FCT administration, their workers under the Joint Unions Action Committee are continuing their strike over unpaid wages and unresolved grievances. That's despite a national industrial court order to resume work. They're supposed to go back to work according to the court. Now, Minister of the FCT, Nyesom Wike, has threatened sanctions for those who refuse to comply. Well, let's move on to our UK papers. We've got The Guardian, and it is looking at Iran. So essentially what we're seeing is that Iranian medics believe that more than 30,000 people died during the protests. You know that the numbers were hovering around 1 to 2,000, and they're saying it's considerably larger. That is according to The Guardian. And there's also news on the front page of The Guardian that UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is realistic about any threats, and that's as he heads to China for a very important state visit. That's after approving the building of that massive embassy in London. And lastly, let's look at the Financial Times. The Financial Times does report that sources have told their reporters that the Trump administration is indicating that security guarantees for Ukraine would need a peace deal, likely involving territorial concessions to Russia, to be agreed. You can imagine that that is not going to be peaceful listening for the likes of Volodymyr Zelensky, but we'll see what happens. Those are your newspaper headlines and your world brief. Love to hear your thoughts.
That's not possible, because when you even look at the constitution of Ukraine, it's not a good one. It's not possible. There's no provision for that, and that's what Putin has always wanted. And doing that will just be surrendering to Russia, because if you give them more territories, if you go back historically, it was just like Hitler when he was fighting to get Sudetenland. I think it was Neville Chamberlain. Once Neville Chamberlain says, okay, let's appease the aggressor, they gave him more land, he'll ask for more. So don't encourage it in the first place. Secondly, as regards China and Africa, the truth is they gave those loans because they wanted influence and they wanted business influence. I mean, look at what they've done to countries like Zambia, for instance. Where they've taken, I think there are daily newspapers even in Zambia that have Chinese extraction and the likes, and the loan really did weigh Zambia down at some point, and that's what they did for most of the African countries. Hang them with the loan, And when you hang them with the loan, you are able to move around them and get your companies in there to consolidate. So they're already at the consolidation phase. So they will not care about development any longer. They're already at the consolidation phase. I really want to move to America. I can't just stand the hypocrisy of the Republican Party. Because all of a sudden, you saw what happened yesterday when Ilhan Omar was sprayed with...
Yes, we were going to take it, but just out of time.
With something. And then you can see the reactions of the people. You can also see their reaction as regards now saying that Pretty had a gun on him. The same Republican Party that fights for the Second Amendment now have a problem with somebody having taken a gun to a protest. What about the young man that took a machine gun to the protest that killed people? What about the likes of, what's it called? The Proud Boys.
Okay.
And the other Republican-supported group that take weapons. So all of a sudden, the pretext of the Republican Party that has always been about gun ownership and gun rights, all of a sudden, they now have a problem that Kristi Noem was saying that somebody's a domestic terrorist because they took a gun in America to a protest, so they don't take guns in America to protest any longer. But if the Republican does this, it's right. But if people on the left do it, they'll say all sorts. I'm even shocked that they've not even started mentioning the fact that the only weapon he had in his hands, which was a camera, I'm sure the Republicans have not even started saying that it is, what's this Hungarian man's name, George Soros, that gave Pretty the camera. You can see their level of asinine hypocrisy, bogus hypocrisy. I can't stand it.
Right, so at the beginning of, let me go to Spain. At the beginning of January 2025, Spain had about approximately 840,000 undocumented migrants.
Yes.
There's been that argument for those who are in support of, granting, let me call it an amnesty for undocumented migrants who've fled for different reasons and come into Spain. That's a hotspot, by the way, especially from sub-Saharan Africa, because of the borders it shares with some of the countries on the continent. That the undocumented migrants have contributed significantly to the workforce in Spain. In fact, they've said that their contributions have improved their economy in the last few years. This is according to the Prime Minister. And so it makes sense in this regard to grant, within a period of time, amnesty to those who have a clean criminal record. So there are some conditions attached to it. This is a move away from trends in Europe in recent times with, people far-right emerging and a tough stance against migration. It's now exploring and looking at it that actually it's not in all instances that it's a bad idea, especially for low-level jobs where the citizens of the country are loath to do them. And you need that. It's also in Spain that has an aging population. They are looking at pension numbers in the next few years and looking at the fact that if they're going to sustain economic growth, they have to absorb more migrants. Maybe this is what other countries might begin to explore and look at. Because when we look at the history of migration and tough migration policies, they've had to lessen or reduce how tough it is because of the realization that it's not always bad news for those who always castigate migration.
I hope Trump is listening.
It does contribute significantly to the economy if it is properly managed. So maybe, perhaps Europe might want to explore managing undocumented migrants who have served communities, which England used to do United Kingdom used to do for a very long time, where you've shown strong ties to the community. You have good behavior. People can testify or attest to your good behavior,
and then you taken from the social welfare system.
Exactly. So maybe that's a way to rethink migration rather than demonize it and this, intolerance for it at that level. So perhaps Spain is leading the way. Other European countries might consider it after they, review their economic stance.
Okay, let me start from Nigeria and move outwards very quickly. The statement you read about President Bola Ahmed Tinubu seeking an amendment of the Court of Appeal Act to increase the number of Court of Appeal justices from 70 to 110, not 100, 110. I think it's a good move in the right direction, to the extent that the main objective is to enhance the efficiency of the appellate court. to make it easier that, you know, the dockets are not overloaded, as is the case now, and that judges, their lordships are not overworked. Because part of the problem we have in Nigeria, you will hear on one hand that justice delayed is justice denied. You hear that delay does not, delay defeats equity, because the courts, you know, they are overburdened. The judges are overworked. So anything that can be done to make the process easier, that will be in the good interest of both democracy and the delivery of justice. Under this Tinubu administration, welfare issues have been addressed, but there's still a lot more that can be done. One of the issues that the proposed bill is going to address is about virtual hearings, it's about you know, hierarchy within the judicial system. Now, last year, there was a members' bill proposing the increase in the number of Supreme Court justices from 21 to 30. Yes. I don't know how far the Senate has gone with that, but the whole idea is just to facilitate efficiency and justice delivery. Now, very quickly, in the case of the ICE, that's the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, being deployed for the Winter Olympics. The key point is that there are two arms of the ICE. You have the group that is called HSI, which before now had been involved in international operations just to provide assistance to deal with transnational crime and emergency situations. Then you have the ERO, which is the one that is constituting itself into a menace, behaving like Trump's militia, harassing people, killing people. This month alone, that arm of the ICE has killed Rene Good, has killed Alex Pretty in the state of Minnesota. And President Trump has been encouraging them, using them like a militia. I'm sure it was probably one of the militia men in plain clothes yesterday that poured substance on Omar, Ilian Omar. Well, we've not concluded on that, but the issue simply is that international ties are frayed. There's a lot of suspicion. There's confusion in Italy because Italy will not imagine that they will send the ERO arm of the ICE to their country. But it's been clarified by the Italians themselves that they will be in the American consulate and they will just provide background support. As for China, now debt is what is being paid by these African countries. Yes. Now, Nigeria owes China over $6 billion. Kenya, Zambia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, all these countries went and collected easy loans from China under what is called the Belt Road Initiative, the BRI, or what is called the New Silk Road. But when you borrow, even when the Chinese say, oh, it's just 1% and all that, you have to pay back. However, the major thing about borrowing from China is the opaqueness of the financial system, you know, and the disbursement of these loans. The major thing for African leaders, now that even bilateral loans and multilateral loans are reducing, the USAID has been shut down, other bilateral loans have been stopped, it is for African leaders to learn to govern well and to develop the capacity to negotiate better in the international system that is emerging. If you borrow, you pay. And then we, the people of Africa, long-suffering people of Africa, we always raise questions about what they do with these loans. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.